Evening. I wanted to welcome you to the Wednesday, April 10th, 2024 study session of the Palm Springs Planning Commission. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chair Wormick,
Present.
Vice Chair Alayan,
Present.
Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Present.
Commissioner Murphy,
Present.
Commissioner Rotman,
Here.
Commissioner Callardine.
Here.
Thank you. And this is a study session today, so it will be informal. We're not taking any official action. And we have guests with us. Can the guests introduce themselves before we go to public comment?
Yes, please, and thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of the Commission. We're so pleased to have the consulting team with us tonight who are undertaking the comprehensive update of our zoning code. So we'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. We've talked about this a few times, but we're excited to be embarking on this process and excited about the work they're about to undertake. And the goal of tonight is really to sort of start to pick your brains on the priorities and goals and objectives for this update and sort of how they should be approaching that. So I certainly want to give them the floor. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Max Pastore to introduce himself and the rest of the team. He's the project manager from Code Studio, and we're looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak before we do that? Is there
No members
anyone
of the
here?
public have signed up that I'm aware of. If there's anyone who wishes to speak.
There being no members of the public who wish to speak, I'll close the public comment section, and as we get to the end of this, I may reopen it if we have any members of the public who'd like to add a comment. So the floor is yours.
Good evening, Madam Chair and fellow commissioners. My name is Max Pastore. I am an associate principal at Code Studio. We're a zoning firm. We are based primarily out of our Los Angeles office, which is my boss and colleague, Colin Scarf, over here. But we are also in New York and in DC temporarily at the moment. But we are really excited to be introducing ourselves as well as our subconsultant team to speak a little bit, hopefully have a more of a loose conversation if we can, just as we get our feet wet, really, as we start the process of this zoning code update with you all and with the update to the historic preservation ordinance, as well as sort of the complementary design guidelines for commercial areas within the city. So with that, we have a presentation where I think we'll be able to walk through. Perfect, here we go. Thank you very much. So I'll try to be pretty brief. I know that it seems like our time is limited here tonight. So slide one, I just think we did that. But again, here's our team. This is the Code Studio team, 3 folks that we introduced so far. And then from our consultant team, we are lucky to have, who's unfortunately not with us today, is Neil Payton with Torty Gallus. He will be supporting us with the design guidelines for commercial areas. We have Paige and Turnbull with Flora over to my left. As well as Hannah, who's sitting in the front, who will be helping us out with the Historic Preservation Ordinance. From a CEQA perspective, we have Laura Mail. She's not with us this evening. And then from Outreach, we have Josh over here, who I think you're pretty familiar with. He's local staple to the community. We're really excited to have him and his team to help us with the outreach component of this effort. And so, as you can understand, at a very high level, we have 3 big elements to this effort. It's a zoning code update, trying to implement the general plan updates that you have, the various different elements that you've updated, housing, et cetera. We have the design guidelines for commercial districts or commercial areas, and then, of course, the historic preservation ordinance. So a little minor thing about Code Studio, a little bit about us. We were founded in 2006. We really feel that we are pretty good at what we do personally. We think that there's the ways in which we regulate codes from a form perspective primarily. They, of course, do other things too. Really helps us create plans and codes that create more vibrant mixed-use places, and in this case, in particular, find ways to ensure character and community needs are met in the right and proper way. That's also climate friendly and so forth. So we think that we're a pretty good leader in this. We don't think that there's anybody else humbly or not so humbly in the nation that can do quite what we do. So we're really excited to get started and work with you all on that. Again, as you can see, we work across the country. All those blue states highlighted show you, and the yellow dots show you where we work or have worked in the past. And so, of course, we have about 88 codes under our belt. That's a lot of different types of codes based on the place. And we've got about 9 employees at the moment, and it seems like we're kind of growing a little bit at the moment, so we're pretty happy about that. And just for a very high-level introduction, we have some local experience based on the Los Angeles Code and sort of handbook that's associated with that. That's been a big, big effort. That is a city-wide code update that we started with just the downtown area and Boyle Heights. So that's a really exciting project and really has gotten us a very deep understanding of many, I think, the state regulations that we'll be working with you all on in Palm Springs. And the same, I think, and probably more applicable would be this example from Pomona that we're actively working on. In fact, I just submitted an updated draft for them of this code this past Friday. So with that all said, we have a pretty good handle, I think, of what we might be getting ourselves into with your community, and we're really excited to really play with the tools that we typically use or that we might start to consider using to really be adaptive to your needs here. And so speaking of adapting, we really want to make sure that we're adapting to climate change. We were lucky to have a really brief, hopefully not the first, but not the last discussion with the climate subcommittee just about various different goals and opportunities that we can do as part of the code update. So we're definitely thinking about that a lot and would love to hear more of your thoughts on that. But generally, we have a list of questions, just 5, but we want it to be a pretty open discussion. I'll get back to this after I get through some next steps, but we want, again, to have like a very nice open discussion with you all to sort of get your initial thoughts that we can start to think about. But just in terms of our immediate next steps, and it seems like the format of the slide has shifted a little bit, is we are going to be continuing to dig into the existing materials review. So we've already started that a little bit. A big part of that is getting into the deep dive into the housing element, in particular, and the updated other elements. So we're excited about that. We've taken a look at various different other plans, particularly from a sustainability perspective. And we're then going to be sort of in partnership with engagement, thinking through the beginnings of our code audit and approach, which really is opening up the hood, so to speak, of your zoning code and seeing its structure, how we might think about restructuring it a little bit to make it work better for you based on input, and just opportunities for new tools to be added to it as well. And again, very critically important as part of this, in tandem, we're working with Josh to develop we hope, a really well-balanced engagement plan to make sure that whatever we propose is vetted appropriately throughout the process. So with that, hopefully we can jump into, well, a little bit of minor schedule update. We're thinking that initially, at the moment, starting from now through probably the summer or so, will be that first sort of analysis of that code audit and code approach piece. And currently, our thinking is that basically sort of sometime in the summer into the fall is when we'll really start getting into the generation and thinking of the zoning districts themselves. So, and then sort of back after that, sort of backing in further into the winter and into the spring of next year, the other remaining zoning code elements, so the other articles of the code that we would be needing to build as part of that. So with an expectation of sort of a public review process of the entire complete document, starting of basically just about a year from now. So that's, and all of that really, it bakes in, of course, the parallel efforts with historic preservation and the design guidelines. So it's a bit of a moving target once we hear a bit more about sort of our engagement needs and just what we hear from you, but that's all I have. So if you have interest in opening up the discussion, I will hand it back over to you all.
Thank you. Shall I just go around and start with Commissioner Rotman and go through issues that you have? I'm sure you have a list.
I have a few items, and I may add some later. The city has different districts and zones, and I think it'd be really nice to create, whether it's at intersections or at entrances, some sort of identification or some opportunities for that, and even some design guidelines of what could happen at those nodes or those important intersections. Parking, we have seas and seas of asphalt parking. I think we should take another look at the parking requirements, the shade requirements, the types of trees that we use in those parking lots. And from my own personal experience in Santa Monica, we developed a share road in our neighborhood, and basically no sidewalks. It's all shared between bicycles, cars, pedestrians. It was all all the planting was xeriscape. It was all solar-powered street lights. I'd like to see if there's opportunities, or even open up opportunities, more opportunities for something like that to occur, because it helps create community. And so that's something. And then I know from my own experience in my own neighborhood, we're trying to find places to put monument signs that identify the neighborhood. And there are a lot of impediments in the city codes against that. And I think if there's a way to work around that and make that simpler, that would be helpful. So those are just some few.
Commissioner Calhoun?
Yeah, so I've been interested in this project for quite a long while, as the chair can tell you. But I've been focused originally on the consistency between the general plan and the zoning code, because we have some pretty gross inconsistencies in land use designations, which I trust we're going to get rid of. Let's see, maybe a notes here. Is there, right now, we've also got sort of an inconsistency in between the way the general plan describes land uses and the way the zoning code describes land uses. And the boundaries of the zones aren't the same in some cases, and the ranges don't match. And I assume we're going to be addressing all of that and try to get the boundaries to be matching. And are you going to follow the general plan when you do that? And I guess a related question is then, since they even use different units, basically of one is net and one is gross, are we going to be able to fix that? No, I don't expect you to be able to answer that, but those are some of my concerns. And then looking at the general plan policies, how they reflect down each to the zoning code. Some of them are only addressed at a general plan level, and it might be good to take a look at beginning to carry them down into specific zoning requirements.
I would just say to quickly answer your question, yes, that is definitely one of the biggest priorities for us and a requirement for us from a state law requirement perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes, I have, I guess, your previous slide asked for concerns. And I'm by no means a zoning expert. I guess the two concerns or areas of interest I have is how the zoning changes are going to affect the tension between things like building height inflation. You know, you build one 6-story and then there's going to be 6 of them. So kind of density and height. That concern and traffic and safety. As you guys know, there's very limited roadways that cut through Palm Springs area. And the more we build, I'm just want to making sure that the traffic and safety is somehow considered in the zoning plan. The other tension or area of, I guess, conflict is open space. And I don't know what if this is going to touch the zoning codes at all, but the more we build, the less open space there is. And so I don't know if that's going to be in the zoning code or somewhere else in the general plan, but that's a concern I have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, I'm very excited to see this get underway. I worked for the city of Oakland for 17 years, and we undertook a zoning code rewrite about midway through my tenure there, although I wasn't in charge of it, but I was very much involved in that. So I'm looking forward to seeing things as they get gelled. A couple of items that I think come to list early that I think we need, and some of these we've talked about here as a commission before for projects, but providing incentives for affordable and workforce housing, such as density bonuses, height allowances, setback reductions, et cetera. On that line, I think we sometimes have a tendency to sort of give away the farm without getting things in return, and I think we've got an opportunity now to sort of pull back on some of the by right allowances and really provide some workable incentives to sort of get that workforce and/or affordable housing. I think we need to look at our commercial districts to provide more mixed-use districts across some of our, I call them tired commercial strips, which I think if there were incentives for redevelopment that would include commercial on the ground floor and residential or hotel above, I think we need to try to look at providing incentives for those in certain areas. Obviously, there's only so much of that can go around and be absorbed in the market, of course, but I think we don't do a good enough job doing that. One comment regarding design elements for non-residential, I think we need to provide step backs along certain urban pedestrian corridors above 2 or 3 stories. We've got some examples downtown, at least one that comes to mind that I don't think we did a very good job as a city in pushing the upper floor back, and it sort of creates a little bit of an imposition to the pedestrian scale streetscape. So those are just a couple of my initial comments. I look forward to seeing this thing as it moves forward.
Commissioner Baker?
A lot of mine have already been stolen, so I'll echo certain issues. Sustainability comes to mind as item number 1, providing building materials, solar, electric vehicles, using everything, looking into the future, and especially water. We keep building, and one response I hear from the public is, well, where's the water coming from for all these new houses that we keep building? So we need to look at that. And also, we did mention, I'll echo again, trees. We think that the palm tree is this beautiful symbol, but it really doesn't provide shade for either pedestrians or buildings to cool down the asphalt jungle.
Commissioner Ryan?
Thank you. I'll start off by echoing Commissioner Rotman. We're way overparked, and if there are creative things we can do, especially in, both commercial and residential zones, but there are commercial centers that have way more parking that they need, and if we could incentivize, allow them to carve off parcels, pads that they could do additional retail development on, and we could stop leaving vacant with asphalt, that would be great. I think also if we could establish maximum parking, not just minimum parking, that would help us, because there are if it's not codified, there are retailers and commercial developers that want to force the issue and use more parking than is necessary. Transition between zones, and that's, there's always tension where we have one zone back up against another, and they don't necessarily play nicely or get along well together. And I think one of the other commissioners also mentioned in residential areas where you have the need for a step so that you don't have higher floors looking down directly on lower floors, giving more privacy. I think that's a good thing to do. So it's not just between different types of zones, but also within the same band of, say, residential zones. What's the single greatest concern you have with existing zoning? Well, it's not the zoning, it's the zoning code. It's just really inaccessible to people who aren't planners for a living, even to people who are planners for a living. I've seen just what you showed, some of your examples of other work where it's very graphic intensive and you have illustrations, those, lots of those. That's a very good and useful thing. When you're asking about historic preservation issues, My concern, or the area I'd like to encourage you, is to make adaptive reuse a reasonable thing to do. We, in the past, have had some tension between, say, historically designated. Palm Springs is different from other communities in that the property owner doesn't have ultimate say over whether or not their property is historically designated. So they can, so issues can be forced on them over their objections. And where we have a series of underutilized or unused hotels or former apartments, those I think would be great opportunities to get some housing, especially for workforce or affordable housing in there, if it wasn't so insurmountable to overcome the impediments associated with the historically designated properties. If only I could read my writing. Oh, and one other thing, we're going through, and I think this is the whole country, not just us, a time when golf is kind of on the decline, and we have a number of gated communities or golf courses that were developed in a different era, and where everybody wanted great big golf course properties. I think that there are golf courses that are now in financial straits, and that will become, the pressure will increase in the future. And if they were able to carve off pieces that are waste area, pieces that were not actively being used, and put those to use, not just, I see it done sometimes with picking up another residence or two, but that would be an opportunity to integrate into the community a walk-to destination for light commercial or light retail, coffee shop, and other things that could be used. And I think that would help increase the walkability of the community, and also give some revenue to the golf courses. And finally, anything that you can do to increase our pedestrian friendliness, and that includes with shade, with I guess bike paths on pedestrian, but to encourage people and make it more pleasant to walk from one place to another, that would be a very good thing. And then we would need even less parking everywhere we go. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and I concur with most of your comments. A couple of things, urban heat is really high on my priority list. Dealing with that, we're getting hotter and hotter, and therefore we need to really be creative in our zoning code in terms of how we deal with that. There was a study recently that I shared with Chris that our city is probably sixth in the valley and has 1/3 as many trees as Palm Desert. Our poorer areas probably have very few trees. They also have very few sidewalks. They don't have built-in pocket parks where people can walk to, and in fact, they have glass-strewn streets that people have to walk on. So there's a neighborhood disparity, and I think we need to think about zoning sometimes by neighborhood, especially the neighborhoods that are more isolated, to requiring auto use, having it be too far to walk to a grocery store. Those are things that are problems. This was built as almost a car city, and we're trying to go into a different mode, but we're stuck with the roads and what we have. So I've always been interested in seeing a requirement for trees, a tree ordinance, trees every 15 feet, not just shades. Thinking about, when you think about landscape, some way in our code for our staff to know which plants are no longer viable in this system. We've changed in the last year. I think we've changed over from an area 9 to an area 10, which means we're hotter and fewer plants live. So thinking about our landscape requirements, thinking about things like roofs, thinking about whether we can, asphalt, can we cover the asphalt with something that's reflective, or can we get, in at least residential areas, all permeable, some kind of permeable surfaces, and surfaces that are more reflective and not absorb. To the extent that we can work with buildings, I happen to live in one, it's not a new subdivision, but it's a newer subdivision, and there are many, many things that could have been required that aren't done, that weren't done. Things like separating the concrete from the building so that you don't create an urban heat zone. Looking at those individual things, requiring shading that's significant enough, requiring shading on a western orientation, things on the individual buildings that we need to look at, looking at whether or not we should be looking at some certification on our commercial buildings. Again, I was a lender in the Bay Area. Almost everything we lent to was LEED certified. I don't think we ever see a LEED certified building in this community. What makes sense here is some of that something we can build into the zoning code. The other thing is I agree with Lori about trying to put some small commercial into neighborhoods so that they're more walkable. We created a zone where a developer could come in and request a 5,000 square foot house and change the zoning over, but we didn't put in a requirement for pocket parks. People will walk their dog to a pocket park. They'll walk their kids to a pocket park. It creates community. It can be done by creating some kind of an HOA structure where the city isn't responsible for all of the funding of that, but how creative can we get on a neighborhood basis in creating things that create walkability? In our downtown, the mention of the palm tree, which unfortunately it's a grass, it's not a tree, and it really doesn't provide shade, but creating some kind of shade structure that's either through trees or overhangs that allow people to walk, looking at getting shade studies as we approve buildings and having some requirement in for shading. Looking at some of the ordinances we've created, and I've been involved in two of them. One was reworking the PD ordinance, and the other was the city's golf course ordinance. Do those meet our current thinking? Did we take away too many incentives? And I don't know if we did it right, but did we take away too much from the PDs to get things that are innovative? And did we put enough into the golf course ordinance to get the kind of small commercial that Lori's talking about? And the other is mixed use on our streets, not creating long avenues that all require commercial, allowing housing, and then parking critical. I totally agree with parking maximums. I also agree with thinking about parking in terms of what you're putting in. I would never create a standard that required more parking for a 3-bedroom unit than a 2-bedroom unit or a 4-bedroom unit, trying to think about what do we want to incentivize with our parking standards. We've done some wonderful things here in terms of parking with historic structures and reuse, but thinking that through, also looking at our streets and preserving our streetscapes so that if parking comes with a building, it comes from behind, and you don't have parking in front of the streetscape and destroy the streetscape. Trying to create or recreate what we have. I'm just thinking if there are other things. I heard some really fascinating things. I sat in on the sustainability discussion with you. And I was very impressed with some of the things they were thinking about. Just trying to be as creative as we can with and we know it's not the building code, but figuring out what we can do with sustainability with our buildings and helping the work that our sustainability group is doing. And this is now open for discussion. Just raise your hand and talk.
Yeah, just one other thing I was thinking about. I'm not sure what the zoning is on Indian Canyon, but I think Indian Canyon needs a refresh. It needs a new look at that. If you're not familiar, it's the street parallel to Palm Canyon, our main street, and it has a mixed use of stuff. Sometimes it's just the back of a building, and so I think there's an opportunity to really create some life on Indian Canyon. There are sections that have that, but I think we really need to take a look at that more closely and see how to encourage more and better development there. And the other thing is, in support of some of the other comments, we have some roads in Palm Canyon in Palm Springs that are 4 and 5 lanes wide unnecessarily. And I wonder if there aren't opportunities to bring more landscaping or other uses for that, which would really help with the sustainability issues.
Yeah, building on what the chairman and the vice chairman just said about small commercial, I would really like to see if the consultant could come up with some success stories around the country for what we call less than neighborhood commercial. I lived for a while in San Francisco, and of course, in that environment, you had a little commercial store on most corners within 1 block or 2 blocks of where you lived. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head where that's been done or recreated in a modern environment, but I sure would like to see if that has, other than the 7-Eleven model. But it would really be nice if we could get some more lower scale, small commercial activities that people in the neighborhood would enjoy and would utilize. And I'd sure like to see if there are any success stories that you know of.
Well, these are all fantastic comments, by the way. Thank you all very much for the thoughtful discussion. Specifically about the small-scale neighborhood commercial, that is something that I think always comes up in all of our jurisdictions that we work in. And increasingly, for obvious reasons, it's very critical to be able to have more things in walking distance to residential areas. And you can go from not doing too much to doing a lot of things. And we've sort of played around with quite a few options of how to do that. I mean, there are certain ways in which you can do that we've done in Los Angeles. It's a different setting, different type of community, but still something that they valued. A lot of that was making things that were non-conforming, conforming, which was really great. And other places, like, for example, Pomona, they have a real problem losing a lot of their commercial space, but a very entrepreneurial immigrant community that has interest in having lower barriers of entry to create a small sort of mom and pop shop that could maybe scale up on maybe corners of streets and things like that we've been testing. So yes, the answer to that is there are many ways that we can play with that, and it takes there are several different tools in our toolkit that can get at that.
One other thing is that there's a very strong movement in this town to protect our hillsides and to protect what's beautiful. And I sat in on, I chaired the General Plan Steering Committee. Our business community has a concern on protecting our hillsides and outdoor activity to attract tourists. And I think we care about it for beauty, and I know there are standards in the zoning code, and I think thinking about what we can do to enhance that protection is also important. The other thing is nightlife. People come to Palm Springs and they eat dinner, and then they say, what do we do? And so trying to figure out how we can safely allow for more nightlife in the town.
as long as we're having some go-backs, a couple things I forgot, and Chair Womack mentioned a couple things. One is the reflective surface for asphalt and permeable paving. I think those are both key, and those would do a lot to help us further our goals towards sustainability. Also, specifically when we're talking about uses that are not compatible, we have a lot of not allowed. We have people build roof decks. There's no prohibition on roof decks, but what would really help is to be able to give specific requirements as far as how they need to be situated, what lines of sight do need to be protected or not protected to get privacy, and especially when we're talking about any kind of construction that goes up into our hill area, which is very coveted. And then finally, the landscaping, I think that we care a whole lot about landscaping, and we don't necessarily have all the expertise that we need. And I think since things do change and certain plant specimens will become invasive where they weren't before, or they will become diseased where they weren't before, I think having I think, as the chair pointed out, not necessarily codified that you have to follow the guidelines, but have the guidelines a separate document that can be more easily changed than changing the municipal code. And then finally, just publicly, Palm Springs is a very progressive city, and we really value housing, affordable housing especially, and we really value our cultural resources, and we really, really value sustainability. Those have all come about in the last, say, 10, maybe 15 years at most. Our code hasn't been updated since then, and we need the tools in the code so that our values as expressed publicly and in the general plan, in some places in the general plan, can actually be put into the zoning ordinance so that people are required to embrace them.
Commissioner Roth?
Yeah, one more thing. We've had a very controversial drive-through, and I understand there's another one potentially coming up. So I think we should really address what the city wants to do about drive-throughs and where they can happen and what capacity they may have and that sort of thing. So.
One other, sports standards, because we value people's being able to live peacefully and also have sports. And some sports, like the very, very popular sport of pickleball, can be incredibly intrusive if it's too close to residential neighborhoods. So standards as to when and what can be put into, I mean, some people have estates that they want pickleball in, and they want tennis courts. Others of us, golf courses. I mean, there are issues about adjacencies with sports in terms of what works, promotes the sports, but doesn't interfere with peaceful living. So that's an issue that comes up to us as well. Chris, were you going to stop us?
I was going to build off of the comment that Commissioner Rotman made, but I'm actually going to reserve my comment for now.
But are there other questions you have of us?
Well, I think first I wanted to say that for all of the, I wish I could respond to every single one of your comments and your discussion items. I think in many cases, nothing that has come up is out of, way out of the realm of possibility. I mean, there are zoning tools that can, in some shape or form, discuss or can, work to get to all of those things. There are different ways in which we can apply them, and some of them might contradict each other. So there is a balance that we'll have to strike. And I think we're pretty excited to get started to find out what those tension points are, right? And what the trade-offs would be. I think in particular, I think open space was discussed a lot. That's something that we in particular are really excited to jump into. And also the trade-off between that and designated parking spaces and having to have dedicated parking areas. And the ways in which we can sort of make all of these things work. I mean, the ways in which we can think about transitions between different buildings and step backs along facades, different street types. And the roof deck was an interesting comment too. More of a clarification question. Is that more for multifamily or like for large scale development, or even for single unit homes are doing roof decks? And that's what okay, it's more of the single unit. Okay. So yes, Colin or Wodka or anyone else from our team have any other questions or clarifications that we wanted to ask without us taking you through the rest of the night?
Have we not addressed anything that you want us to?
Did want to get, I happen to live in Santa Monica, so I'd be really curious where that street is.
Longfellow Street in Ocean Park.
Okay, we'll go check that out.
We spent 10 years with the city doing it, and it was the first sustainable living street in the country.
Thank you.
At the same time, I've seen streets without sidewalks in my gated community that require people to walk on the streets. And there is because it's a circular road, not the individual streets, it does sometimes create clashes between pedestrians and cars that are speeding. So trying to think through where we do those streets. I think that's somewhat different, although I think we didn't get to it in the circulation element, but there's been a lot of interest in street closures, the possibilities of street closures downtown. We experiment with that every Thursday night, and trying to find different ways. And we experimented with it during COVID to completely close down a street, I believe, and that didn't work. But just the trying to figure out sharing, how you share streets and how you do it and what we can allow. And height. Please play with building height. It's our community goes from folks like us who would like to see more density because we'd like to see more affordable housing, to people in the community who feel that something that's 6 stories high is way overbuilt. So some people think, I was in a house recently, a neighborhood house there was a contest and an appeal from it being 2 stories as opposed to 1 story. So.
These are all great. I mean, I think we have some pretty good, first of all, we're going to be trying to do our best to make sure that whatever we do is going to be sort of in compliance with what the general plan has laid out, which has a lot of details about all of those sorts of things. But I think, related to the height and things like that, it seems like there's also things that we can look around in terms of how we're measuring height. I mean, not just what is allocated, but what does the measurement process look like? And that could look various different ways. So, I mean, there's lots of little minutia too. And I think we want to make sure that we're not opening up something that requires you to do a general plan amendment, but to try to use what flexibility we have in interpreting those elements within the general plan into the zoning code.
Any other comments from the commission?
I just have.
You, Chris, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just going to ask this question because you didn't bring it up, but I just wondered if you as a group had any thoughts on public outreach. It's a very important piece of this project. We want to make sure we're talking to the right people, as many different types of people as we can. We have Josh here from Burke Ricks, and there are based locally. So I just wonder if you guys had any thoughts about, who we should be talking to. Just want to make sure, we're kind of hearing from the right people at the right times.
I think the best place to do that is through the neighborhood associations, which are pretty well organized, 1PS. And each neighborhood organization has at least one annual meeting, sometimes 2 or 3, community socials and whatnot. So that would be, I think, a great venue to present. As long as we had some assistance, if we were a neighborhood association, some guidance as to like a format. How do you present this material to just neighbors?
I would say schools. We want our children, it would be nice if you got a little input from our kids in the schools, and they're, can certainly provide you with some names of people you can go to do that. The business associations, going to PISA, the hotel association, going to the Arenas merchants. In addition to 1PS, and then probably the Coachella Valley you've got people like the Coachella Valley Builders, you've got the normal stop points of people who build in the community and their concerns.
I don't know if Architectural Alliance is still in existence, but they may be also somebody to approach.
Yes.
Yeah. And then maybe the Realtor Board. No.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
On this subject, we have to be a little bit cautious in that we're trying to make ourselves consistent with the general plan. And a lot of public outreach has the risk that people are going to want to come in and change, thinking they're changing the zoning, but they'll want to change the general plan at the same time, which obviously we can't say you can't do, but a primary objective is to get the 2 documents consistent. And if we're always changing one and chasing our tails, it's a little tricky. So I think when you go out to do public outreach, you'll have to do it and realize that that's in the background. That we're trying not to change the general plan all over the place.
We've only done a very limited update on 4 elements, so I'm assuming the most important element of the general plan right now to work with is the housing element, because that has so many new requirements of us that we haven't, I don't know that city's staff has even begun to think through how you're going to deal with all of those. So, but at the same time, I don't think we can do this without public outreach. I mean, there are large meetings at the convention center which work, but getting out to some of the smaller neighborhoods is also important. And we have trailer park communities that people might have a say on what they want, and I don't think we want to reach just the so-called organized neighborhoods that sometimes don't include our poorest residents.
I would suggest that your undertaking here is largely ministerial. And although I might believe otherwise, many people do not find the zoning ordinance to be very interesting. And holding public meetings and looking for meaningful public input on a ministerial action on a really dry document, it's tough. It can be tough to educate the public enough so that they can make meaningful suggestions. And I think probably we absolutely need to reach out to the public, but narrowing the focus of each meeting to things that are changing or will look different, that will impact the particular audience of a meeting would be helpful, and not giving a broad scope and not spending a lot of time educating people on the process of the zoning ordinance update. And Just thought.
It's very helpful.
Thing as simple as a survey. I mean, when I talk about structured, they don't have to understand the zoning codes, but just what's, just a basic survey with 10 questions posed through 1PS, I think would give you guys a lot of input. It may not be useful, but it would be good input, or some input.
With that, I think we're done. I wanted to thank our guests. Oh, this is, let me just open up what I didn't open up before. If there are any members of the public who are here, who came because of the zoning code, who would like to speak and share comments with us.
And nobody is online.
And there's no one on Zoom. Okay, that says a little bit about what public input is going to be on this topic. I'm going to close this section of the meeting and open up.
Madam Chair, might I suggest we just take a really brief 5-minute recess just to transition over? Our zoning code
Absolutely.
team, I think will probably want to get on the road, and we'll reshuffle ourselves here, if
Great.
that's okay with you.
Recording stopped.
back in session, and we are now in the regular meeting of the Palm Springs Planning Commission. Can I get a roll call, please?
Chair Wormick,
Present.
Vice Chair Alayan,
Present.
Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Present.
Commissioner Murphy,
Present.
Commissioner Callardine,
Present.
Commissioner Rotman.
Here.
Can I get a report on the posting of the agenda, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, the agenda was available for public access at the City Hall exterior bulletin board and the Planning Services counter by 9 p.m. on Thursday, April 4th, in accordance with our city policies and procedures.
Thank you. At this point, we are at public comments. The time is set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on consent calendar and other agenda items and items within our subject matter jurisdiction. Note that the Planning Commission cannot take up items that are not on the posted agenda. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Testimony may be offered at this time or the time of the hearing. Members who would like to comment on the consent calendar or new business items are directed to comment under this section. And item 2, which will be in front of us, is a public hearing item. So if you're here on item 2, you can comment at this time or when we call that item. Are there any member? Did I do the acceptance of the agenda? I did. Did I?
Yeah.
Oops, let me go back for one step. Can I have a motion to accept the agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Now we're back to public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment at this time? Are there any members on Zoom?
There is one member on Zoom who is part of the applicant team for item 2A, so they will speak at that time.
They will speak later? Or, thank you. So public comment is now closed. The first item we have is the consent calendar, and it is the approval of the minutes of March 27th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval of the March 27th minutes.
Second.
Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Chair Wormick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Alayan,
Yes.
Commissioner Murphy,
Yes.
Commissioner Callardine.
Yes.
Commissioner Rotman.
Yes.
And now we are into public hearings. The first is item A, a request by Monahan, Palm Canyon LC owner, for a tentative tract map 38846 consisting of a one-parcel lot for condominium purposes located at 1875 North Palm Canyon Drive, Zone C3 and C1 and R3. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this project is before you as a one-lot parcel subdivision. And normally when the Planning Commission reviews these types of tract maps, you have a development proposal that accompanies it. In this case, the applicant is looking to get the parcel approved first and has provided some drawings, site plans, building elevations that are preliminary for comment by the Planning Commission, which will give you an opportunity to see what will be coming later. So the tentative tract map is for condominium purposes. And remember, this is a one lot, and at a future time, the condominium map will go on top of this. It could be 60 units like the applicant is requesting. It could be more, it could be less. But right now, we're here to look at the one parcel tract map subdivision. I'm sorry, let me go back to that other slide. There we go. So future applications that the Planning Commission will review is a conditional use permit, because in the C1 zone, there is a requirement that if you build residential, it needs a CUP. And this lot has split zoning, and I will review that in just a minute. They're also required to do a major development permit and a major architectural application that will be reviewed by the ARC at a future date. So this site is a 4.37 acre parcel. It was formerly the Shiloh Inn back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. The Planning Commission may have, some of the members that have been around for a while may have remembered this as the Tova Hotel site. There was some demolition of existing structures that the city had the property owner do. And this is an aerial photograph showing what it looks like today, which is mainly flat, void of vegetation, and is in a current state of showing the pads where the old hotel used to be. This is north of Vistacino Road and along the north portion or the uptown portion of the city. The general plan designation is tourist resort commercial, and it has a split zone, like I mentioned, C1 and R3 multifamily residential. And we're going to dive into that in a little bit. So the general plan designation allows, the TRC allows up to 30 dwelling units per acre. The TRC covers the entire parcel itself. The proposed project that is preliminary is for 60 condos, which is 14 dwelling units per acre, which is below what the applicant could possibly build there. Looking at the zoning, it's common along Palm Canyon Drive that the first 200 or 100 feet is zoned C1, and then the back portion of a lot is zoned a different zone. And in this case, it's R3 multi-family residential. So the first 200 feet of the parcel is zone C1, and the remainder is R3. And this goes along with your discussion earlier of inconsistency with the zoning code and the general plan, and this is a good example of these types of things that are all along Palm Canyon Drive. So today you're being asked to approve a one parcel tentative tract map with the future applications coming as a condo map, and the intent is for the 60 attached townhouse units. In your packet, there is a draft tentative parcel. You'll see that it is one lot consisting of the 4.37 acres. And then there is also a sample or preliminary site plan that shows what could possibly be built and what the applicant is looking at putting on the site. So it's a mix of 4-unit townhouse buildings along Palm Canyon Drive, and the remainder being attached duplex or 2 units attached. The site currently has one entrance, which is there, coming onto the site, and a new entrance for emergency will be at the south, emergency access at the south portion of the lot itself. Also, he's provided some preliminary drawings of elevations of what the buildings would look like. These are two units with ground level parking and garages and heights to be determined, but this is 2-story, so it's 24 to 26 feet tall. And then some site elevations, and this is the 4-unit that would face Palm Canyon Drive and inward with the parking. Keep in mind that these are preliminary drawings and there's work to be done on these elevations. And this is could possibly be a time that the Planning Commission gives us some comments. Would the Planning Commission like to see this be more pedestrian oriented? In this drawing, he has a wall along Palm Canyon. Is that the best idea? Should these be fronting on Palm Canyon with doors that would face the street? Those are the types of things that we'd like to hear. Site elevation, and then a series of floor plans showing the ground floor, second floor, and then the floorplex itself. So when talking about the specifics of the project, once again, it's a one-lot parcel. The general plan is TRC, the main entrance on North Palm Canyon Drive, another secondary entrance. There's a perimeter masonry wall that's around the site itself that is currently existing and will remain. There's an including of a water retention basin, and it's non-gated. The Planning Commission needs to make findings in order to approve this project. The proposed TTM, one of the first finding is that it's consistent with the general plan. And we'd like to dive deeper into that for a minute. The established zoning designation permits residential at the proposed density, meaning that the underlying zoning, which is a C1 and the R3, allows residential development. The general plan update that you all have reviewed is to revise the TRC, dropping the PDD requirement. The newly certified housing element requires us to eliminate barriers for residential development, and requiring the PDD is definitely a barrier. And the general plan update has been reviewed by the public steering committee and the city council, and staff feels that the planning commission can make that finding. There's a series of 6 other findings that are listed in the resolution and the conditions of approval, and we feel that the planning commission can make those findings itself. We are recommending approval of the tentative track map subject to conditions of approval, and provide comments to the site about the site plan layout and elevations. So earlier in the week, you were emailed some letters from residents in support and other discussions. You were also emailed a business disclosure form. We had the applicant drill down on who is the ownership of the LLC, and you have that itself. This is a public hearing. The property has been posted, and notice was sent to all property owners within 500 feet. So that concludes my report, Madam Chair, and the applicant is here.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Commissioner, Vice Chair Lyon, you had questions. I'm going to start with yours.
Yes, I have several questions. I am troubled some and trying to think my way through the fact that the general plan has not yet been updated. And one of our findings is supposed to be that the proposed parcel map is consistent with the general plan. So I'm having a tough time thinking that we're not there yet. When do you expect the general plan to come through and actually have action taken to approve it or disprove it?
Yeah, there's a bit of nuance to this, so thank you for the question, because I think we should talk through this a little bit. I think at the stage that we are at now, which is the one map subdivision, we feel comfortable making the finding because the zoning is in place and because we don't have the details of the future development at this point. So there is today, under the current general plan, some language that would suggest permanent residential uses on the site would require a planned development district. The intention at this point in time is to change that in the land use element. That's gone through a series of public review processes. The council has opined on that. The steering committee has, and it's certainly our objective as reflected in the housing element to sort of make those changes to remove residential barriers. However, that has not occurred yet, as you're saying. So I certainly don't want to suggest that we are premising meeting that finding based on an eventuality that has not yet happened or in any way tying your hands or the planning commission's city council's hands in making that decision. I think we feel comfortable with it because it's the one lot map, and the future development may come in and look different than what we understand it is today, and this is not tying us to what that development looks like. So it could be that development comes in later that does include tourist resort commercial uses, for example, and we would make the determination at that level of conformance later in the process. In the world in which you all say we don't want to remove that requirement, then the PD would be required and we would work with the applicant to go through that process. So I think we're where we are in this stage of process, we feel comfortable making the finding because there's more work to do in terms of what the actual development itself will look like on the property. In terms of when that process will happen, we had a meeting with the steering committee a couple of weeks ago to finalize revisions to the circulation element. The consultant is working on going through all of that, making those changes, and then we plan to come back to you all with the 3 revised elements that are outstanding for the general plan for consideration. The goal is really to get that entire process wrapped up before the summer break through you and the city council. That's the target, and that's sort of the direction that we've been given. So that's the goal. So we're not talking a huge gap here, and I think we will have more certainty on what that policy framework will look like in the next couple of months. And the intention is that ideally that process would occur before this comes back to you, so we'll know which path we need to go on.
Okay. So much as this doesn't commit us to anything, similarly, does it give any entitlements to the developer that would allow him to come through and build what's been shown on these drawings without coming back for further action?
Based on the current zoning and the processes in our current code, I mean, they would require a development permit, and because of the C1 zoning, they would require a CUP for residential uses on this portion. So I don't really see any substantive path forward without coming back to the Planning Commission based on the action tonight.
Okay. I also note that the general plan, the language of the general plan doesn't limit the construction or development of permanent residences just so long as they're at less than 30 to an acre, but it also says that there'll be it says if residential uses are proposed within the tourist commercial designation, there shall be a secondary use ancillary to the proposed hotel uses. There's no proposed hotel use. Can you kind of explain what this is supposed to mean and how it's been interpreted or applied in the past?
So let's talk about how it's been interpreted in the past before, because we've encountered this on different sites before, and the way that it has been interpreted in the past is that we're looking at the entirety of the tourist resort commercial designation and making a determination that the primary uses within that area should be hotels and tourist resort commercial uses, and that residential as a use in that area should be secondary to that primary use, and so it shouldn't be the majority of what we're seeing as development in that area. I don't think the policy as written is very clear or sort of expresses that in the way that it's been interpreted in the past, so I will acknowledge that. But I will also say that as part of the update, we are looking to also amend that language to make that clearer. So we want to differentiate this from other areas that have residential designation and zoning where hotel uses are also permitted. I think we've clearly delineated that the TRC designation is meant to be more hotel and tourist commercial uses than our normal residential zones where those uses are sometimes also permitted. But we also don't want to stand in the way of supportive residential development. So as the draft language, which is still being tweaked a little bit based on comments and input in this discussion, is looking to make it clearer that standalone residential uses would be permitted as long as they're not sort of the primary use within the overall TRC area, and that we would remove that PDD requirement. If that makes sense.
Okay, all right. And when there are conflicts like this between the general plan and the zoning ordinance, what is the proceeding, what is the order of precedence of the governing documents? Which one prevails over the other?
The general plan prevails.
Okay, right. Let's see. Oh, the other issue that I have difficulty with in finding number one is that it says, among the language that's been provided for us by staff, which I presume is subject to our ability to tweak it, says the intended use will meet the stated goals and policies of the general plan and land use designation by providing diverse housing product in a vacant infill lot. It also says that it will help us meet the targets set forth in the housing element. What do we know about the product? How comfortable are we saying that that the products will be diverse and help us meet the targets when we don't know, there's no guarantee of what the products will be?
Right, so when I wrote that as being diverse, meaning that it's a townhouse development versus an apartment building, it's a diverse in the multifamily style. The applicant can address the price points on what he's looking at, and we've discussed that the types of housing that would, the price point that would come for a unit that is 1,200 square feet versus 2,500 square feet. So he can address that.
Okay, would we need to, would our findings need to include that part at all? If it didn't help meet diverse, because again, I'm not sure that we guarantee it, or that this guarantees it. Do the findings stand as adequate without that last paragraph?
I think the findings, I think that we should focus on the action that is before you and less on the potential development that is coming forward. So I think based on this conversation and thinking it through a little bit more critically, I would be comfortable taking that out because really we should be focused on the mapping action, and the future product will evaluate on its own merits at that time.
Okay, thank you. I think that was the last of my questions for staff. Oh, and I presume that if the chair allows it, that after we finish taking action on what's in front of us, we can also offer feedback on what we see to the developer so that they have the benefit of having that information as they go forward.
I think if the chair allows it, that would be very helpful to the process. Again, this is a little bit odd in that we have a one map action before you, or one lot action before you. We're not technically looking at the development, but of course, I'm sure they would benefit from hearing your preliminary feedback based on what's before you so that they can go through the refinement process before they come back.
Before I go to other questions, I had asked to see if there was any way we could deal with finding number 1 so that we didn't say that it's consistent with all applicable general and specific plans, since it isn't. And I was wondering if the attorneys had done any alternate drafting.
We didn't look at alternate language. I think we were comfortable saying that it was consistent with the general plan as the one lot mapping action without tying it to the future development. So that's where I think if we remove the statement that Vice Chair Land referenced.
But the findings say it's one parcel with future development consisting of 60 attached townhomes. So it's the problem, the issue I have is the finding as drafted.
I suggest we simply add the adjective anticipated 60 attached townhomes.
Madam Chair, if I may, as the commissioner just mentioned, yeah, this is an anticipated project. This is a bit unusual in that we're looking at a tentative track map without an above-ground project set of entitlements accompanying it. The way the general plan is currently written, this project, which is exclusively a condominium project, would be permitted with a PDD, which either there's two possibilities. Either the general plan is amended, as Mr. Hadwin mentioned, eliminating that PDD requirement, or if the general plan provision's not amended, and then a PDD would be applied for that would then permit the above ground development there. We believe that this TTM could still be approved on the condition, understanding that one of those pathways would be followed in order to permit the above ground development. But it would still be consistent with the general plan for purposes of the TTM. Again, this is a bit unusual, but that would be the position here.
And that being the position, can you reword or rewrite this finding so that it reflects what you've just told us?
Certainly, we could revise that finding consistent with what I just indicated on the record, that this is focused on the tentative map and just the legal subdivision of the land, fundamentally for financing purposes to ultimately permit the above ground development, whichever track is ultimately taken there. Yes, I'll work with staff on that to revise that.
While we're deliberating, if you would do that, I can't in good conscience ask the commission to vote affirmatively on the language as it's written.
And for Mr. Priest, you said a couple times that this is unusual. Is it setting a precedent that we might later wish we hadn't set? Or has something like this been done before by the city?
I'm not aware that the city has done this before. It's not legally prohibited to do this way. It does not compel the Planning Commission to approve a future tentative track map in this way if there's clear non-compliance with the general plan. I would contend that we have some unique facts here in that there's a general plan amendment right around the corner that would make this project consistent with the general plan by eliminating the PDD requirement. So again, I'm not very concerned about precedent here because we are dealing with a very with a unique set of facts here. If the commission would like, I will review this finding and I'll attempt on the fly to try to come up with some amendments to the language here. That's the direction of the commission.
Thank you.
Now, do you have other, you still have the floor.
That is all my questions for staff. Thank you.
Commissioner Miller has had his light on for 10 minutes.
And I had a brief conversation with Director Hadwin before the meeting, he's assured me of certain things, but I do want to hear from Attorney Priest whether this action tonight with the parcel map is going to vest this site for 60 units. Yes or no? Because typically when you do a map like this, it has some sort of vesting capacity to it. And I want to make sure that we're not tying the commission's hands when the project itself actually comes before us.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. What this does is it approves a one parcel condominium map, which is basically an airspace subdivision. It does not authorize the construction of the above ground project. That would have to come later through possibly a PDD, and as Mr. Hadwin and staff had indicated earlier, conditional use permit to satisfy the split zoning issue, as well as a major development permit and a major architectural. So there's quite a few hoops left to jump through before this project moves forward. I would also note that this is a tentative track map. This is not the final map. And so, there are also further hoops that have to be jumped through before a final map is ultimately approved of this one lot subdivision. But again, I don't see this as vesting the entire project. Again, sort of some unusual circumstances here where the applicant is seeking one element of this to move the financing ahead. And as indicated in the staff report, the applicant is working on the other entitlements, the above ground entitlements as well.
One other sort of question regarding finding number 2, which deals with the design and improvements of the proposed map are consistent with the zone in which the property is located. I am not sure the way the finding is written there after that we can make the finding because we don't have the design and improvements in front of us as a project.
If I may, Commissioner, this is sort of a strange finding under the Subdivision Map Act because, again, they're talking about the design and improvements of the proposed tentative map. It's not architectural design, so to speak. This is focusing on the design and improvements specifically of the tentative track map. And again, more commonly, you have all of the entitlements being applied for at one time, so you have a better sense of what's going on above ground as well. In this case, we don't have final plans that are before the commission, and so the finding focuses on the fact that the tentative track map is consistent with the zone, with the mixed C1 and the mixed R3 zoning. And it's also consistent with the adjacencies that are zoned RGA6 for multifamily residential designation as well. So again, it's not really so much of an architectural finding as it is a consistency finding with neighboring properties, how those are zoned, and how this is intended to be used and is consistent with that zoning.
If one of the questions, and it might be for staff, but it might be for the developer, is what do they mean that they need to do this for financing purposes, since it's clearly not going, we're not clearly not at a construction financing point in the
Right, the applicant
development.
can talk to that, Mr.
And
Wortman.
would the commission mind if we take that one question out of context and ask you that question is, what do you mean by that?
Yes, no problem. Mark Wortman, managing member of the Monaghan Palm Canyon LLC. So effectively, we're a small family office that purchased this property 2 years ago and went through a number of iterations in terms of the highest and best use. Since COVID, there's been a major capital market dislocation, and it's harder to find partners and it's harder to find bank financing. I was a construction lender for 25 years for various banks that, you could name them all, and I've probably worked there at one point or another. So effectively what's happened is, at this point, in order to move forward, in order to get to schematics and SSDs, et cetera, with architecture and come up with a final project, we need to bring on a partner, and partners have been, investor partners, joint venture partners that I am speaking with. They basically said, unless you get us a 10 on a track map, we're not going to write a check and move forward with you, because we don't know if the city is even going to approve residential in this area, because there's disparities between the commercial and the residential. So, I've gotten to this interesting nexus at this point where, in order to move forward, I need a tentative track map saying residential on this area is what the city wants, and they understand why it's the highest and best use on this site. As much as possible, I've tried to put a site plan as well as hire architects to put together elevations, give us an idea of what the footprints of duplexes would be, come up with a very solid idea of what the next step would be. Met with the Little Tuscany Association back in November, and tried to reach out and effectively check off a lot of these boxes. But getting to this point, in order to, for me to move forward successfully and, keep this rolling so that we could, hopefully start the project for final approval later on this summer, we would need the map at this point.
Thank you. I'm going to take this back to the commission for questions of staff and then have you come up.
Understood.
Commissioner Callardine, do you have questions of staff?
Yeah, I've had some questions from staff. Someone, again, this is a new process, and we've gotten some answers from staff, but I would still like to get them out for the record. The tentative map has a whole series of conditions applied to it, some of them which are engineering conditions. Is this our only chance at those conditions, or will we have a chance to review similar conditions at the time of the master development permit and the CUP?
Right, so when the application comes back for you, there will be additional conditions of approval. So as we move through the process, if there has to be any revisions to those conditions, engineering conditions and so forth, they may change. But these conditions are attached to the track map itself.
Okay, so but we would have the ability to change their effects by conditions on the development permit.
Right, and there are times that there are planning commission imposed conditions at the hearing itself,
Okay.
And that would not preclude that.
Okay, I thank you. Next question has to do with the Palm Canyon Drive itself. And I think I know the answer because we've discussed this already, but this is under Caltrans jurisdiction, this part of Palm Canyon, right?
I'll let engineering answer.
That is correct.
And they're taking the position that they will review the safety of any safety issues regarding the left turns in and out of this project.
Correct. That'll be part of the traffic study that'll be submitted to Caltrans as part of their review.
And will the city have a chance to review that, or this commission?
Because it's Caltrans jurisdiction, from what I've been told by the city engineer and staff, it would not.
Okay,
We do have a traffic
I appreciate
study that,
direct answer.
we do have a traffic study that will be presented with the CUP application.
My overall concern with this section of Caltrans, or of the state highway, I guess, is the visibility and left turns through there on that curve where this project is located. I don't know if we have a problem or not. I sense one when I try to make a left turn out of Rick's, a restaurant parking lot, which is directly adjacent, but I don't want that to be driving here. It would be better in the long run if we could have some sort of double left turn lane in and out, or not double left turn lane, but, two-way left turn lane. And I don't know, that's something the city would have to have a long-term discussion with Caltrans about, or have them relinquish the highway or something. But I have concern about that, and I guess we can't do too much to address it now. Is that the city staff's conclusion?
Well, when you say a left turn lane in, so we would have to ask for more street dedication in order to do that.
Yeah.
Which we haven't explored.
By left turn in, Commissioner, are you meaning from going northbound on the North Palm
Right,
Canyon to turn
right.
left into?
Right, suppose we extended and reversed the direction on the left turn pocket for Vistacino, you could have a left turn pocket into this site without too much trouble.
Understood. Part of that should be reviewed as part of the traffic study. They would verify that the amount of buildup of cars trying to make a left into said
Right.
property into their main entrance should be spaced wide enough from the left turn lane on the southbound traffic turning left onto Vistacino from North Palm Canyon.
I would appreciate it if that could be addressed somewhere in this process.
Understood.
That's primarily what I have. Yes, that's my notes.
Okay, those being the questions,
Yep. Chair?
yes,
I have a couple questions.
of course. And they're of staff, correct?
Yes, of staff. So just two little clerical things first. On PLN1 condition, it says 65 units as opposed to 60. And then there's a discrepancy, and I'm assuming it's net versus gross in the acreage. So on page 5 of 6, item number 3, it refers to it as 4.37 acres, but on the actual tentative track back, it calls it out as 4.22. And I'm just assuming that's a difference between gross and net.
Correct. We'll make sure it's consistent.
So one of the letters we received from the public raised a question about imposing caps on short-term rental. And what ability, if anything, does the Planning Commission have on that?
Right. So I think the city council has gone through a series of changes to the short-term rental ordinance, and I think as a matter of policy, that has been set by the city council. So we do have policies that are permissive of short-term rentals subject to the short-term rental ordinance. So we are not able, through our process, to condition whether or not those are permitted or not, because that policy has been set by the city council.
Okay. Because sometimes CC&Rs do have, maximum number of rental units, and whether it's short-term or long-term, okay. It's up to the developer at that point. Okay. And then just for clarification about the PDD. So typically, as I understand it, the PDD can impose development standards for the development. And although this proposal meets the overall development standards for the site, without a PDD, do we have a vehicle to ask for certain development standards within the site? As an example, setbacks from the internal streets, that kind of thing.
Right. You would have the ability through the site planning development process to ask for that. A PDD asks for things like public benefit. We wouldn't ask for that if they went the PDD route, because there's no deviations in setbacks or height.
Okay. All right. I think that's all. Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Public hearing is open. The applicant has 10 minutes. And then You'll have time for rebuttal, but if you would stay with us to answer questions after your presentation and the rest of the hearing.
No, absolutely. I don't want to waste 10 minutes. I can just tell you, effectively, Monahan Palm Canyon is a family office operation. I'm Mark Wortman. I'm the managing member. We have 3 generations of family here. My mother, my son Reagan, my brother Todd, we're all investors in the deal. Who's missing here is Brian Monahan, who's my stepfather, who passed 3 years ago. He's an amazing guy, really generous, and to the extent that we're just trying to start a family office and honor the legacy that he left behind. That's effectively the intention here. I think this, what we're trying to do, I understand that you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of what the zoning is and et cetera. And I'm, as you pointed out, I'm not a zoning expert by any means. But to the extent that it's my 55th birthday and we could hopefully result in an approval of the tentative track map, then I'll pull on that lever as hard as I possibly can. So with that, I open up to any questions that you might have.
Are there questions of the applicant? Commissioner Rotman.
So who's your market and what kind of price range do you think you're going to achieve if you go forward with this project?
I think it's a really wide market. We've been trying to figure out, and in fact, if you look at the smaller plan is 1,500 square foot, and the upstairs design as it's laid out is a 3-bedroom. I took a look at that a few weeks ago and talked to the architect and said, what if we just take a look at that and as an option B, put 2 master bedrooms up there, because not everybody has, has 2 kids, that live with them, and there may be people that would prefer 2 masters. And to the extent that we would hopefully be building models 6 months from now and have 1A and 1B and let the market decide where the demand is for that, because trying to nail the demographics at this point is really difficult. From a price point perspective, I can tell you that it's not an affordable housing deal. Candidly, I had bought this site 2 years ago with the idea that we could do a affordable apartment complex on it. The financing was not there, and I took the deal to a couple of investors, and they said, well, if you have $10 million to lose, then let's by all means go do it, but we're not in that business, so you're gonna have to figure out something else. Unfortunately, affordable in this particular location on Palm Canyon is not actionable. That said, I think that you'd be looking at, Cody Place is probably the most recent comp in terms of condos that have been built along Palm Canyon. I think it's an apples to oranges type of, that's 3-story, little different location, but at the end of the day, you can't ignore it. Those ended up being $500 a foot. Our smallest unit is 1,500 square feet, so the math on that would be a floor of $750,000, just based on where the market is. Interest rates have increased probably 100 basis points since Cody Place was sold. That means there's less mortgage financing available, so the market may push back just because there's not enough debt for somebody who is coming in at that price point. There may be no demand there, and then we'd have to move down and find the market. Interest rates, as we know, affect residential in a major way. It's a volatile interest rate environment right now. It will affect price points ultimately, but that's the guidance for, you start with the comps and then you try to have water find its level. So that's where we're at.
I should do something. First of all, let me say that I was at the Little Tuscany meeting, but I did not offer any kind of contact or comments to you. So I want that to go on the record that I was there. And then, is there a threshold where this project no longer becomes financially viable in terms of the number of units you build?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that the number that we're at, the by density, I never looked at going to 30, and the way I read the zoning code so that I could go to 15. We started there and we had a couple of iterations. I think what I presented to you actually had a live-work component, but we couldn't make the heights work. So we ended up effectively reconfiguring it to 2-story all the way through. And, my intent would be, to the extent that we could, go to 24 feet. But, that's a conversation for a different day.
All right, thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Lane?
Are you planning on applying for a PDD, or are you planning on following the zoning for R3?
I would go back and work with Glenn and Chris and the rest of the team and figure out what's the best win-win for everybody. I don't have well, if I don't get it that way, then obviously I'm going to walk. I mean, I don't have that kind of flexibility. So to the extent that if the zoning within the city and the general plan is being changed and it makes more sense to go a route that works better for both sides, I'm amenable to that. At the end of the day, you got to get to a win-win for both of us.
Okay. And do you understand, or are you aware that as I look at the drawings that you've provided, they don't, especially all the setbacks and the spaces between the buildings, nothing really complies with the R3 zone? Or is it your belief that it does?
Based on the conversations I've had with the civil engineer and the architects, we've tried to use the guidelines as much as possible. So my belief is that we're in compliance with them. However, to the extent that we need to, meet with the city and, figure out where we're missing things, again, I'm happy to have that conversation. I'm trying to figure out, that's one of the reasons why we downzone the density from 65 to 60 units, is because ultimately we thought it fit better within the site overall.
Okay. If we could take a look at the drawing.
And just
doesn't have a-
for purposes here, we're still asking questions?
Yes, and this is a general question. I'm trying to find, your letter says that the community park is east of the entrance, which to me, that would put us right in the middle of Palm Canyon. And the dog, and the
Sorry,
dog run
that should be west, if
dog
if that's incorrect. Yeah, if it's
So
inconsistent.
is it the,
Correct.
okay, that's it.
Right.
Then where is it? It says the dog run is south of something or other that I can't find the dog run.
Right, so there's a retention area right there that we're going
Okay,
through.
we double as a,
Right, so we're looking at using that retention area as a dual use for dog park if possible, and the intent is to have effectively a community pocket park area and then a dog park if we can figure out how to make it work with the retention basin.
okay, I thought that might be going on, but it kind of was at odds with what I was reading. And the final one, and I think this is a question for you, not staff, what's a dual primary?
A dual primary would be the
Is that the two?
the two master
masters?
bedrooms
Oh, that's what
upstairs.
you're talking about. Okay. Okay, and you said in the letter that all the units would have roof decks?
It is designed that way, so we would have small roof decks up on top, correct?
Okay, did you discuss that when you met with the neighbors? Are they
Yes,
aware of that?
that was presented with at the Little Tuscany
And they
meeting.
didn't have opposition to?
There was no pushback. No.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Is there a pool? I'm just out of curiosity.
No, there's no community pool. What we've decided to do is basically, and my landscape architect is working on some renderings, but our feeling is that in units like this, call it a 10 by 10 spool in the backyard, just a place to get wet and cool off is going to meet the market. Yes. I know I wouldn't buy one without one, so I'm assuming we have to build them in order to sell the units.
So you would plan every backyard space or space for each unit to have something like that with the appropriate setback from the walls?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just, because there is a setback even as close as it gets to the walls. I think the shortest we can do is 3 feet, isn't that
Yep.
the case?
We're working with those.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? I'm just going to, thank you.
Okay.
Public hearing is closed. I'm going to see if I can structure this. So my thought is I want to structure get a sense of where we are first, and then structure in our discussion of the plan so they get feedback if it looks like we are positive, but not vote on it, take the vote at the end on the one-unit subdivision so that you'll have the comments. And I would just say that as long as we can get findings that I feel like we can sign off on, which means that we'll get something from the attorney, I accept the reasoning in terms of financing. I was a construction lender. I understand needing to get partners at this point in time, and I would prefer that we find a way to help these folks keep going. So if the findings are there, I would, and that's been a hard one for us. It isn't our disinterest in having this be a residential zone. It's doing something we can do with general plan finding. And so I want to know from people here if there is any, if people feel comfortable going along with creating the one-unit subdivision. So that's just, and maybe if people can just comment on that first without committing anybody to it. Yes?
I'm totally comfortable with it. I think it's, the only thing I've been a little uncomfortable with is the, density, but if it's, in the 60-unit range, as this is, I agree that, we should do what we can to help the applicant at this juncture.
Any other comments on that? Commissioner Callardine?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with moving forward with just the tentative map at this point in time. We could impose some recommendations, I think, some things that we're currently concerned about, and I'd like to put in some words about asking them to work cooperatively, the developer and Caltrans and the engineering staff to work cooperatively towards ensuring a safe access to North Palm Canyon, but let it go at that. Just raise it as an issue and let them, they would have to address it in their own time. Has there been any, never mind, I'm comfortable with that, that type of condition.
Commissioner Rotman?
Yeah, I mean, the only hesitation would be the being locked into 60 units, but that seems to have been answered. So in that case, I'm okay with this.
I am still having a little bit of a difficulty with the cart before the horse argument here. I have never seen a map, and I had this discussion with Chris, and I thought I was feeling comfortable then, but I still have a concern about the cart before the horse. I've never seen a map go forward without at least concurrently having a project to accompany it. So, and I don't want to sway anyone else's decision necessarily. I actually want to support the project, but I just am having trouble based on my experience with mapping in California. I've never seen this process work before. Doesn't, as Attorney Priest said, it doesn't mean it's not legal. I just don't feel comfortable because there's so many things that could be worked out as part of the project review that may advise the map.
Chair, can I sort of add to my comment? I do have some hesitation about the housing backing up onto Palm Canyon. And I think there's, on the north side, there's a couple projects. There's the Tangerine Court, and then further north of Racket Club, I can't think of the name of the development, where they have units directly on Palm Canyon. I think in terms of success. The one, Tangerine Court, is much more successful because they have a huge buffer of landscaping, and there's a huge backyard with more landscaping, so that you don't have that housing imposing so much on Palm Canyon. I don't see that here. And again, that may be part of the project, but I think it's something that I do have some concerns about having housing backing up on Palm Canyon without adequately addressing the impacts of that, both on the residences as well as the physical experience on Palm Canyon looking at this project.
Commissioner Lyon, or do you?
Like Commissioner Miller, I have some consternation about this from a procedural and technical standpoint in the findings that are required to be made. However, I think that I can reconcile myself to this, at least to the map, by looking at the general plan in a larger context, which is general plans are a whole lot of verbiage about a whole lot of things, and they're just rife with internal contradictions, including in this one. I would look at the housing element, in which we commit to removing barriers to housing. And if I look at this as technical issues, they are technical, but I think in the spirit of what we're trying to do in the general plan, this is a leap, but a small leap to make to encourage housing, and this is in a location where it would be suitable to have housing that is not $1.5 million to get into, and this city really needs that. And so I am, as long as our attorney has removed all the references to the fact of our strict compliance with the general plan, and we're instead referring to the fact that the revision to that is upcoming, I'm willing to look at as a minor technicality and say that it complies certainly with the spirit of the general plan.
Commissioner Baker,
Madam Chair, members of the commission, just to address Commissioner Olayon's concerns there. Mr. Hadwin and I have been communicating in putting together some language that will condition this TTM on following one or the other track, as we were discussing earlier. And I'll let Mr. Hadwin provide that language when the commission's ready for that.
thank you. I still want to go to Commissioner Baker and is to see the language. And at this point, do you have language for us?
I do. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to share it necessarily, or do I?
Well, we're not going to vote for a little while, so.
Okay, but so essentially, if we look at finding number one, where I'll read it. The tentative tract map proposes the creation of one parcel for condominium purposes, period. It is anticipated that future development will consist of 60 attached townhouse multifamily units. The general plan designation of the parcel is tourist resort commercial, which as currently written requires the review of a planned development district, PDD. However, the established zoning designation for the site permits residential uses at the density proposed. There's a typo there that we will correct. Additionally, the general plan updates revised land use element proposes to remove this PDD requirement for the TRC designation to remove barriers to residential development as required by the approved housing element. That draft has undergone several reviews by the public, the General Plan Steering Committee, and the City Council. The plan is anticipated to be adopted in the coming months. And here's where we've added new language and removed much more. If those changes are not adopted, the currently contemplated future development will require a planned development district in order to remain consistent with the general plan. Because the project is conditioned to secure a PDD, if the general plan amendment is not approved to remove this PDD requirement, the tentative tract map complies with the general plan. Everything that follows in the current condition will be removed. Everything as currently written where it talks about the TRC designation allows multi-family residential development not to exceed 30, everything from there down will be removed. We would also recommend a new PLN condition 5 that would read, should the revised land use element that is ultimately adopted through the general plan amendment not remove the planned development district requirement for permanent residential uses on this site, one shall be required in support of such development to be reviewed by the Planning Commission.
And number 2, are there any changes that we need to have?
I think based on the discussion with the city attorney, and since that is focused on the tentative track map, no changes would need to be made there.
I agree.
I'm not taking motions right now. I wanted to get a sense of where we were going. And at this point, what I have a sense that we will make a motion and approve it later, but I would like to get in the recommendations on the plan that's before us and comments on that. So I'm going to move into that. It will not be part of our motion, but I want to take that up so that it's clear that it's these are concerns of the commission. And I would like to have comments on the plan that is in front of us to help the applicant have an understanding of what we would be concerned with if and when this comes back to us in a form similar to this. So, Commissioner Rotman, do you want to start?
Yeah, so overall impression is it's extremely dense. And I have concerns about setbacks, not only from the internal street to the garage doors, which it looks like they're 5 feet from the curb. And then even your backyards range from as little as 9 feet, I think it is, and maybe extend a little larger along Palm Canyon. Within that 9 feet, I don't know how you get a 10 by 10 spool in there. This project is a project of garage doors, and I just don't think that is a very pleasant experience. And it's also, there's very little creativity in this plan, I think. I would almost rather see a series of row houses with parking behind and maybe a public park or something. Just think outside of the box. But the way you, the 10 feet between spaces, the 5 feet from the curb, there's no room for any landscaping along the streets. There's not even going to be room for a tree because by the time you get your utility connections, there won't be any place to put a tree along the street. So I really think you need to rethink the overall plan. It may mean that you have to reduce the number of units or else come up with something really, really creative. On unit 2, which is your largest unit, you have the smallest common areas. Your first floor common areas, there's not even room for a dining room table. It's shoved up against the kitchen counter. So I think you should take a look at that. You have a huge room upstairs, but the main space is not, people in Palm Springs entertain, and people in Palm Springs live an indoor-outdoor life. And the people I know who live in projects that have roof decks rarely go up to them. Even though it's a great view, all the entertaining happens on the ground floor. And I really think you should take that in consideration and try and give a little more generous outdoor space, as well as a little more generous interior space for the public areas. I think, yeah, and then I mentioned earlier about my concerns about the units facing Palm Canyon and how you're going to mitigate that for the residents, as well as how it's experienced from the public. And I don't have a suggestion for you. Maybe if you decided to build a common a meeting room or a clubhouse, maybe that goes along Palm Canyon. And then, just so that it's not, it's not 8 units facing onto Palm Canyon. Yeah. Thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Lane?
Yes, I have several. I think that there's too much parking. You heard us talk about that before. And all the units have 2 cars. Plus, when I look at the common area parking, it looks like way more than would be needed for units of this size. It also presents your visual entrance to the project is nothing but but cars, and I think that's unattractive and could be placed in a different place.
If you have somebody who wants to come up to the mic.
Chair and the commissioners, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is John Rodriguez. I'm with High Tech Consulting here in Palm Springs on Tahquitz Canyon. We're the civil engineers and site planners for the project. We did address and look at the issue that Vice Chair brought up about the parking as you enter. So you're not looking at the backs of cars. We can eliminate those parking spaces for landscape, about 4 stalls on either side of the existing island that's there, and create some parallel parking locations in and around the retention basin on the south side of the project, as well as the egress road on the south side as well. So we've taken that into consideration already as to try and make sure that aesthetic as you drive into the project is maintained.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Rotman that it's a very dense project. And when I look at these, I believe that the spacing between the buildings, you've got 10 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. And I don't think that meets at least the R3 minimum standards. The front and backyards are both tiny. I think that, as was suggested by another commissioner, one of the ways that you could pick up some of that space would be by having a community pool and by a community clubhouse or something, so that you don't need this at all. You don't need what is attractive, I know, for sales, but completely useless splash pools in the back everywhere. I think that this site is really ideal for maybe a little bit of a different market than you had envisioned. This reads to me as if it's a short-term rental, a vacation home, a getaway for people. If this were to target people who live here, I understand from people in the marketplace that there is a real dearth of homes in the $600,000 to $850,000, $900,000 price range. And this location is about 100 yards away from Escuela, which you get on your bicycle and you zip up 1 mile and you've got 2 great grocery stores, you've got restaurants, you've got gyms, you've got banks, you've got everything you could possibly need if you live here. And I think that this suddenly becomes a place where you don't need a 2-car garage. That might make it hard to sell, I don't know. But if you target the people who actually live here full-time and who can't afford $1 million for a home, I think that there's a great audience and market there for somebody who will actually live in this and commute. You're right off the bus line, you've got a lot of other good things going on that location, and you might just find yourself not trying to compete with Cody Place or Vibe or who the others are, but hitting a niche in the market that is currently completely unserved, and you might be able to surprise yourself with brisk sales. Just thoughts.
Other comments before I make? So I wanted to say that I agree with Commissioner Rotman. As I look at these and I look at the 10-foot separation, 5 of which is on each side, I live in Asina and I have exactly that separation, only I have it on both sides. One side it's my dog run and the other it's my trash run. And it's absolutely useless. I could have my trash in my garage and wheel it out. That 5 feet does nothing for somebody who lives there. I think you could do something really interesting in a row house concept. You're already trying it on the front. I think you could save land. You could figure out a way to make this work better. You might be able to make, instead of 4 lanes of housing, you might be able to make 3, but have the same number of units. But I think being more creative with the site plan would be really helpful. I think also there aren't as many houses being built in the 1,500, 1,800 foot range that works for an awful lot of people who are 2 people instead of 3, and we have fewer families. So some of the smaller, I like the smaller size that you're projecting, but I think it needs to be more creative. And any way you can cut down in the parking, we don't need to overpark this, and I don't know if the city by that point will have any flexible standards so that we don't have to require parking, but we definitely do not want things in any way overparked. And the other issue that got raised, more park space, not parking all around the park space, and a lot of concern working with Caltrans on the safety of getting in and getting out of the development. And I'm not as upset by the frontage, but I think when it came back to us with the housing frontage, we'd have to really take a look at what works and look at that, give a hard look at making sure that what you're proposing is workable and attractive for that section. So, and we like street trees, and you need enough room in a frontage to be able to put a street tree with some barriers to protect your street, but we're going to want to see trees. And so if you've got spaces that are too small to put trees in, that would be a major issue for us. But any other comments to share? And any disagreements with the comments that any of us have raised? Okay. With that, I would like a motion to approve with the amended language in finding number 1 and the additional planning. It would be PLN number 5. So is there a motion? Commissioner Callardine, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Baker, and can you call the roll? Or are there any comments before we call the roll? Commissioner Murphy, you have your light on?
I do, sorry.
Do you wish to comment? Okay. Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Callardine?
Yes.
Commissioner Baker?
Yes.
Chair Wormick?
Yes.
Vice Chair Alayan?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
No.
Commissioner Murphy?
Yes.
Commissioner Rotman?
Yes.
The motion passes. Best of luck to you. We look forward to seeing you back, and good luck on your search for a partner. Oh, and happy birthday. Thank you. Okay, there is no unfinished business. There is no business. Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. I have one. Oh, go ahead.
I attended the Architectural Review Commission meeting last week. It was kind of a slow night, but it was nice to see what they do, at least.
I have two. One is for the planning director. At some point, can you report back to us on housing projects that have been approved in the last 5 years and their status, on things that we haven't seen? If there's any, where things are, if they're going through plan check or if they've been withdrawn?
Absolutely, and when I come to my updates, I do have updates on the two in the north end that you had inquired about previously, so I can do that then, if you'd
Okay.
like. Yeah.
And do we have a date set for the water board tour?
May 23rd, yes, thank you. This is a good update that I wouldn't have thought. So I believe Chair Wormick had mentioned previously that we were working on coordinating with DWA on a tour of some of their facilities. They have given us a date of May 23rd. Let me just confirm that. Which will be at the DWA Retention and Aquifer Facility in Whitewater. So we'll be meeting there at 8 o'clock for those who are interested and available to come. I've not done it, but I've heard a lot of people talk about this tour. Chair Wormick, I believe you've done this tour, and it's tremendously informative and helpful, especially as we think about water and water use and sort of how our water works here and all of the fun that's coming down the road in terms of water regulations. So May 23rd, 8 o'clock, we'll circulate the details on that again, but hope that you're able to make it.
Any other planning commission requests or reports?
I'm just curious, you stopped talking about the drive-throughs. Was there a thought that you wanted to share, or?
It was more of a question. And so I think obviously this conversation exploded through the Starbucks conversation. And I think there was obviously a lot of very site-specific consideration that went into that conversation that I think we're very clear on. I think where it might be helpful, and this doesn't necessarily need to occur tonight, and so I stopped myself because I think we'll have plenty of touch points through the zoning code update to have this conversation, but I think I'm hearing a lot of conflicting information about how people feel about drive-throughs and where they may or may not be appropriate in the city. And so I think before we go too far down the path of looking at revising the policies, I think it may be good to sort of pick everyone's brain on sort of what the decision makers' thoughts are on that, right? I've heard some people say they should only be allowed up by the interstate, which I believe is something that India or Palm Desert has considered at different times. I've heard other people say, well, maybe it's okay over by Home Depot and Walmart where we have a lot of drive-through uses already, or down by Smoke Tree where we have, again, big box sort of commercial uses. So I think just maybe think about that, and we'll revisit it at some point in the future, but it would be good to get some direction before we get too far down the path. And obviously, I stopped myself also because I think there's some work that we and the consulting team can do in looking and doing a bit of a survey on how other municipalities who've looked at revising this in the last few years are tackling that same issue. So we'll come back and maybe we'll have a bigger conversation on it at some point.
Planning director's report?
Yes. So a couple questions that we had related to Miralon and some of the transportation improvements around that. So the first one was around when the extension of Sunrise Parkway gets triggered, and that is interesting. It's a condition of approval from the original entitlement that the Sunrise Parkway extension gets triggered when 50% of the units come online. So it's actually quite specific. Let me find my notes here. In this mess. It's like the 612th certificate of occupancy. We are, of course, significantly below that. I think we're roughly around 200. Of course, many houses have been entitled, but certificates of occupancies and building permits haven't necessarily been pulled. So we're a ways off. That said, I think the developer at different times has thought about building that out sooner than the condition requires for a host of reasons. I don't want to speak for them. This is not something they've told me directly, but I think given the current market conditions and kind of this, slow walking a little bit of the residential development that's coming online at this point, as interest rates, we wait for that to settle and that conversation to play out. I don't know that they're necessarily looking at doing that in the immediate future, but technically it's not required until the 612th certificate of occupancy is issued. The other question was about the gate on the Caballeros side of the development. And so that wasn't a condition, but it was something that the commission discussed, and it was an agreement that was reached by the developer. And it was in response to concerns that the residential community on the east side of Miralon, along Sunrise and Caballeros, had concerning, I think a lot of the construction traffic specifically seemed to be the concern from what we could see back in the notes. And so the agreement was that the Caballeros gate would not be open and accessible to construction traffic for the early phases of development, and that it would all be routed to the Sunrise entrance at the north side of the site, with the understanding that at some point it would need to be utilized as the development progressed eastward. They're getting close to that point, so they've already begun conversations with the engineering department about when they can start to utilize that for the purposes of construction. And there was other nuance to that agreement as well about when they get to the eastern side of the site and start developing that, the engineering didn't want the construction trucks traveling across the undeveloped land and disturbing that. So there's some interplay there that engineering and the developers are working on to come up with the appropriate timing. But what engineering indicated earlier, and I think Jonathan has left, is that touch point is likely coming up in the not-so-distant future.
And the concern I have on that is, when will that gate be open for the residents to use, since the gate that's off closer to Indian Canyon and Sunrise is the furthest away from where the residents have been built to date.
Right, so I think as that phase of development on the east side, so once the construction gate is open and it's being used for construction purposes and that phase is being built out, once those homes come online, it would then also be accessible to residents.
I think the concern I have is that it would be accessible to construction and not to residents.
I
And-
think...
And I don't know, I remember the discussions on it, and I don't believe it was separated.
I think in terms of construction management, and this is something the engineering department's working through them, it would be about mitigating conflicts between resident access and construction access. So the timing of that would have to align such that the construction, the use by the construction vehicles would not be sort of dangerous to the vehicular,
Just
the
throwing
regular
out
residents.
Ascena, they've been using our residential gates for years for construction, and there isn't a conflict.
I
I throw that before you to raise.
Okay, we'll take that back.
Because this is very inconvenient for the residents there.
Again, what I understand is they're looking to open it soon. I don't imagine they would want there to be a huge timeline between when it's open to construction vehicles and residents who are living on the east side, so we can get further clarification, but...
If we can get further
yeah.
clarification, I just don't see the reason for the separation.
And sorry, let me just clarify that I'm not aware that there's any codified separation. I think there's just a conversation that needs to happen about making sure that it's being done in a safe way. You had previously asked about two of the projects in the north end of the city. One of them is Allure, and that is on Rosa Parks. And that was for 26 units. That is entitled, they've not pulled any permits that we've seen. No plan check has come our way for that, but there are still valid entitlements there. In looking just on a quick web search, they are still marketing that development and looking to sell lots. But there's been no activity that we are aware of with the building department in terms of moving forward with that development. But it is still on the books, it is still entitled. And so that development may still move forward as they go through that side of the process. The second project was down on San Rafael, west of Tower Market on a vacant site on the south side of San Rafael. And that was also for, I believe, 29 units, in that case, two-story condos. Those entitlements lapsed, and they chose not to extend that entitlement. So that project is not moving forward and would need to come in again. So that's what we know
And
about
do we know
that.
why it lapsed?
Actually, what I had heard was, well, it was Glenn's project, so.
Right, the owner moved to Europe and was marketing it. We've had some discussions with different people. It's on the market for sale, so some have come in asking, can I do single family there? It's not zoned for that. It's for multifamily, so we're waiting until some other developer comes in.
Is it in College Park? And just noting that that is in the College Park specific plan boundary. So of course, as that process is moving forward in terms of the amendment, we have the opportunity to reevaluate that land use. You know, I'm not sure that we're considering downzoning at this point, but something that we could consider as part of that process. And those are my updates.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, no questions. Thank you very much. We are adjourned until currently 5:30 on Wednesday, April 24th, but we are planning a study session on the tree ordinance, are we not?
Yes, but we are waiting for feedback from the attorneys on the draft language before we schedule it. There isn't a lot else tracking on the agenda, so I don't know that we have a need to start earlier, but I think as we know more about what's on the agenda, we can consider that, and I'll reach out to all of you and see if there's any conflicts. Typically for those who maybe haven't experienced too many study sessions with us, we try to give ourselves more time, so we're not here until 9 o'clock at night, and tend to start study sessions a little bit earlier and then take a break before we go into the other meeting. If we have just one item on the regular agenda, sometimes we keep it at the regular time. So I will follow up once we know what's on the rest of the agenda.
It would be useful in that to get samples of good ordinances from other communities, and then take a look at that and try and understand what is being presented to us and what's different and why.
Yes. Yep. And I know that the team working on that, the sustainability department, have certainly been looking to other examples. And so they'll be queued up to talk you through that background.
With that said, we are adjourned.